Recently, we made a 3-video series on whether 2 Timothy 3:16 proves a Bible canon is inspired by God. In order to give a little bit of context for this video, I'll be giving an extremely brief summary of our previous series. I'm not going to be repeating everything, so I really hope that you'll be able to watch them for yourselves and consider the evidence that we shared. There will be a link to the playlist in the description, or you can follow this card. The main argument of that series can be summarized as follows. Premise 1, a Bible canon is a collection of writings that has been officially recognized by a religious community as authoritative for their beliefs and practices. Premise 2, 2 Timothy 3:16 does not refer to, much less promote, a collection of writings that has been officially recognized as authoritative by a religious community. Conclusion, therefore, 2 Timothy 3:16 does not refer to or promote a Bible canon. This video will mostly focus on premise 2. In that series, one of the points we made is that the way the first phrase of the verse is commonly translated, all scripture is inspired by God, is actually a poor translation and is more accurately translated, every writing inspired by God is, etc., etc. Having the more accurate translation of this verse helps to make it more obvious that 2 Timothy 3:16 is not promoting a Bible canon, but this conclusion is not dependent on the more accurate translation. The conclusion is still true even when considering the common translation of this verse, which is exactly what we will be doing in this video. So let's do that. Let's consider whether the phrase, all scripture is inspired by God, proves that a Bible canon is inspired by God. In order to promote a Bible canon, this verse would have to at least refer to a canon. The phrase, all scripture, is sometimes interpreted as though it refers to a Bible canon. And the idea is that because there are multiple writings being referred to, this means the verse is referring to a collection. But if you were to speak about multiple writings, does that automatically mean you're speaking about a collection of writings? Keep in mind, the first requirement for something to be a Bible canon is that it has to be a collection of writings. And in order for something to be a collection of writings, they would have to be gathered together, whether into a physical or a digital location, since collections are defined by having been gathered together. Simply mentioning multiple writings does not equate to those writings having been gathered together. You could mention multiple writings and simply be referring to a category of writings, such as a genre like history or romance, rather than a collection of writings. This chart is pretty helpful in distinguishing between categories of writings and collections of writings, and our second video in our previous series goes through this chart in a lot of detail, so be sure to check that out if you'd like to consider it more closely. The main thing I want to point out from this chart right now is that categories are defined by characteristics present within the writings, whereas collections are defined by the process of gathering the writings together. So in order to know whether 2 Timothy 3:16 is referring to a category of writings or to a collection of writings, we need to see whether it describes the writings it's talking about according to their characteristics, or whether it describes the writings according to a process of gathering them together. Again, the first phrase is what people use to try to prove that a Bible canon is inspired by God. So let's take a close look. All scripture is inspired by God. Is there anything here that indicates that the scriptures being referred to have been gathered together? There doesn't appear to be. There are many ways that this verse could let us know that it's talking about a collection. For example, it could say, all scripture has been collected by God, or all scriptures collected by God are inspired, or all gathered scripture is inspired by God, or all scripture has been inspired and bound together by God. Notice all of the words or phrases that would indicate any process of collecting or gathering together all Scripture is completely lacking in this verse. This means that this verse gives no indication that it's talking about a collection. Instead, what we have is simply a description of the characteristics shared by all Scripture. All Scriptures share the characteristic of being inspired by God. Since the phrase is defining Scriptures by a characteristic, that plainly reveals it is talking about a category of writings, not a collection. And since it doesn't refer to a collection of writings, it is impossible for it to be referring to a Bible canon, since this is the first requirement of the definition of a Bible canon. And one other thing that's important to mention, although I'm not going to get into the details in this video, is that because this verse is completely lacking any mention of a collection of writings, it means it is impossible for it to meet the second requirement for having a Bible canon. Again, the second requirement is that the collection has to be officially recognized by a religious community as authoritative for their religious beliefs and practices. And since there's no collection, well, you get the idea. You can't recognize a collection unless there's a collection to recognize. For a fuller explanation of this aspect, be sure to check out our third video in our previous series. It'll be tagged above, and there will be a link in the description. So even the way 2 Timothy 3:16 is commonly translated, we can clearly see that it doesn't refer to, let alone promote, the idea of a Bible canon. Therefore, it is impossible for it to prove that a Bible canon is inspired by God.